Hello, it's Charles Cherney, and this is the Ask Charles Cherney series. I'm a realtor serving buyers and sellers in Cambridge and Somerville, Massachusetts. Today's question is, what is the mortgage commitment? So the mortgage commitment is a letter from the home lender to the home buyer that commits the lender to providing the buyer a mortgage loan for a given property. And the mortgage commitment is an essential piece to the equation of a home purchase. So let's consider an example. A typical timeline would look something like this. On day one, there is an accepted offer for the buyer. And then the offer accepted includes a home inspection contingency, and the home inspection contingency is resolved and the home inspection is completed by, say, day 7, and the buyer is moving forward in the transaction. On, say, day 7, 8, 9, or 10, the purchase and sale agreement is signed. The P&S, as we call it for short, is the binding agreement that binds buyer to seller and replaces the signed accepted offer in the transaction. So when that purchase and sale agreement is signed, typically the only contingency that survives is the mortgage contingency. And so the reason that that's the case is the lender needs some time, typically 3 to 4 weeks, to issue the mortgage commitment, to give the buyer the letter that confirms the lender will give the buyer the loan to purchase the property on the closing date. So in this example I'm giving, imagine that the offer is accepted on February 1st, that the home inspection contingency is resolved on, say, February 7th, and the purchase and sale agreement replacing the signed offer, binding buyer to seller, is signed on February 10th. Now, the appraiser is sent to the property to complete the appraisal report, and the lender begins to gather information for the buyer in order to be able to issue a mortgage commitment, a letter saying they will give the buyer the loan for the closing. As the mortgage commitment date approaches, and again, in this example, if it's, say, 3 to 4 weeks after the purchase and sale is signed on February 8th, 9th, or 10th, we would imagine then that the mortgage commitment is going to be due sometime in March, say, for example, March 8th, ahead of, say, a closing date of March 15th. So as you're marching closer to that commitment date, the lender typically is knocking off conditions that they need to satisfy to give the buyer the loan. They need to, for example, check that the income that the buyer is reporting is confirmed by their tax returns. They may need to confirm specific addresses the buyer has lived at over time. So the commitment is always conditional from the outset, but as you're marching towards a clean commitment on the commitment date, the lender is checking off conditions that they feel they need to meet to be satisfied that the loan can be approved. Of course, the appraisal is an essential component here. The lender sends an appraiser, a licensed appraiser, to the property to complete an appraisal report, and they'd like to know in the appraiser's report what the property is worth so that they're comfortable giving the buyer a loan to purchase the property. So we understand that the mortgage commitment is an essential piece to the process of the transaction completing itself. Now, what happens if you approach the mortgage commitment date and the lender still needs more time? Well, what happens is there is a commitment extension, and this is an extension that's in writing. The norm in the Cambridge and Somerville market where I work as an agent is for the buyer's real estate attorney to request an extension of the seller's real estate attorney, and that request is made in writing, and if it's agreed to, it is executed usually through the attorneys in writing. So you ask yourself, why would the seller grant an extension? Say, in this example, it could be March 8th, and it turns out that the lender needs a couple more business days for the mortgage commitment, clean commitment to be issued. The reason that typically an extension request is granted is everyone is seeking to arrive at the same objective, which is the closing. The closing date in this example is March 15th. And so if on March 8th, the lender needs 2 extra days to get the mortgage commitment to the buyer, you'd expect the seller and the listing agent for the seller and the seller's attorney all to agree that it's a wise idea to grant the extension. because everyone wants to get to that closing on schedule on March 15th. And if for some reason the lender needs more time to get the commitment to the buyer, you grant it. Otherwise, the seller would have to release the buyer from the transaction, because there is a mortgage contingency that survives in the purchase and sale, and start the whole process of selling the home over from day one with a new buyer that they have to find. So a commitment date extension is common and not something necessarily to panic a seller or a listing agent or a seller's attorney. Everyone is seeking to achieve the same objective. And in today's day and age, the requirements can be endless and the paperwork shuffle never ending to get all the ducks in a row for the lender to issue a clean commitment. Issuance of the mortgage commitment is typically the golden moment in a transaction, as it is at this moment that everyone can breathe a sigh of relief, because what's left is simply scheduling the closing, doing the final walkthrough, and actually closing, and for the property to sell. So we can appreciate with this discussion of the mortgage commitment and the mortgage commitment date how a seller is tickled pink and excited when they receive an offer without a mortgage contingency, what we call a cash offer, since they don't need to fret then about the buyer getting the mortgage approved and getting their mortgage commitment in hand. But again, it's very common and it's the norm for buyers seeking to purchase a property to get a loan. And in doing so, then they're going to be looking to get a mortgage commitment. And that date typically falls 3 to 4 weeks after the signing of the purchase and sale. And that makes it usually right on the doorstep of the closing. If the closing's in 4, 5, or 6 weeks from accepted offer, we understand that the mortgage commitment is coming usually just a little bit before the closing date. So this is an important element to any transaction, and it's important if a buyer needs an extension on their mortgage commitment date that they're getting that extension in writing. So you'll want to make sure that you're tracking your mortgage commitment date. As a buyer's agent, I'm careful to put that date on my calendar and to check in with my buyer client and their attorney as it approaches, and their lender, to make sure everything is in order and, if necessary, to get the extension. I'm Charles Cherney. Reach out at any time for assistance with buying the right home, selling for the best price, or to get your questions answered about the market, your home, and the community. Take care.